Hello, and you're listening to South Fork Law. I'm Jill Bernstein, a retired criminal defense attorney, and I'm joined by my co-host, Doug Hildahl, an attorney in the firm of Lester and Hildahl, and Dave Nelson from the law office of David A. Nelson. Actually, David isn't with us this evening because he's off being a lawyer and involved in a jury trial this evening, so Doug and I will be having the pleasure of interviewing Irene Morgan. But South Fork Law is a show that allows us to express our passions about justice, and we hope to use our time on the radio to provide information and insight into the justice system. We are indeed honored tonight to have as our guest Irene Morgan, who is the founder of the Coalition for Restorative Community. Did I get that right, Irene?
Restorative Community Coalition, yes.
I almost got it right. Irene, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Irene, before we start talking about the coalition, let's talk a little bit about you. Would you tell our listeners where you come from and basically the arc of your life that took you to become a founder of this coalition?
Thank you. I have been a resident of the community for 68 years, lived on the same farm all that while, and living on the farm, you learn about nature and the natural process of things. And so I have always known that the prison system didn't work innately. I've always been for the underdog. When someone was being tormented or teased at school, I would always go in and break it up and try to have some sort of resolution. And after my kids were grown, there was an empty spot. I knew it was more than empty nest syndrome. My husband and I ran a business for 20 years, and I started looking into what else I might do and became a therapist and a counselor. And in all of that, I knew that there was more to do, and one day I picked up the Chuckanut Reader, actually, and found that there was a man that had been in town with his book, A Matter of Time, Don Kirshner. And it's actually Don who helped me realize that this was a worthy goal to help people returning from incarceration to our communities. And through that research, found out how right I was and how wrong, from my perspective, those people are treated by our society.
You're talking about people who are incarcerated.
Yep, the prisoners who return home.
What was the book A Matter of Time about?
Matter of Time is the story about him and his journey through the prison system. The prosecutor that actually was prosecuting him dropped the charges because he was in 11 prisons in 2.5 years, federal prisons, and everywhere he went, he left a really wonderful trail of helping people. And so he dropped the charges and allowed him to go back to his life. And so it was a really wonderful story about how a wrong decision can bring you to a completely different place in your life.
And so that was an inspiration that helped connect you with this mission. And looking at your website, and first of all, would you tell our listeners what that website is?
We have two websites. We have an old static website that has lots and lots and lots of information, whatcomrec.org. That's Whatcom, REC, stands for Reentry Coalition. That's who we started out as, .org, whatcomrec.org, and then restorativecommunitycoalition.org. I know it's long, but...
So that's what led you to this work that you're doing today.
That was the deciding factor, was reading Don's book, and we're still really good friends today. And it's just very satisfying to know how much he has done.
You indicated that your involvement with the natural processes and being on a farm led you to believe that incarceration has problems. Tell us a little bit about how that happened, and tell us a little bit about what you see to be the major problems involved with incarcerating people today.
Well, there's a natural process in everything. You know, I'm a farm girl. If you leave the gate open and the cows get out, you're going to have a whole bunch more trouble than if you had just shut the gate in the first place. And so I liken that to if people don't know how to live in our society, if they've never been taught, then they don't know how to do it. And Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And that's what we're doing, I believe, in our court system, in our police work, our prison system. You put someone in there, you don't allow them to be the natural human that they are. They can't touch, they can't feel, they can't do any of these things, and yet we expect them to come out whole at the other end after spending $30,000 or more a year, and they get virtually no education, and it's gotten worse over the years. And if I may just jump ahead, this is what we do in the coalition. We help people become that functional citizen. And I have a vision for the Restorative Center, fashioned after Delancey Street in San Francisco. Mimi Silbert has been doing Delancey Street for 40 years. She has an 85% success rate. And my vision for Whatcom County is a version of Delancey Street, and I've named it the Restorative Center. Again, a vision, but it's very doable. It's housing, it's education and employment, and the third piece that San Francisco doesn't have is a wellness and recovery center where people can actually learn how to eat good food, and there would be a farm connected to that, so they could actually go out and see that chocolate milk doesn't come from a brown cow. Right. That a carrot actually comes out of the ground and it's crunchy, so there's just so much that most people don't know about living life that I believe we can teach them, and it's just humane from my perspective.
Well, so what you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, is the major problem you're identifying is that we've tried an experiment, we'll call it, with imprisoning people that isn't working. Mm-hmm. How do we know it's not working?
Well, the stats are pretty clear. We have, in 1971, President Nixon declared the war on drugs. And since then, our inmates, the numbers of inmates have increased 300% and 400%. Our prisons increased by 300% in 30 years. At the same time, our population increased 35%. So it's pretty obvious that the laws were changed for the war on drugs to imprison people. And then the prison industrial complex has pretty much been in charge of our prisons.
Well, we're incarcerating more people.
Yes, we are.
But maybe we're getting a good result from that. What leads you to the conclusion that we're getting a bad result from our mass incarceration of the population? Maybe that's a great idea.
The recidivism rate is huge. It's 2/3 most everywhere in the country. And statistics show that our crime rate is going down. And of course, there are those that would say, well, that's good because they're all in prison. But that's really not the case. The New York City has one of the largest and dramatic decreases and downturns in violent crime in the nation. So there's a lot of statistics that show that there are programs that are in place already. We don't have to reinvent anything here in Whatcom County. Everything that we want to do exists somewhere in the country already, and what we want to do is bring them all together and make people whole so they can actually be the functioning citizens that the rest of the citizens expect them to be.
So our listeners understand, you identify the problem is we're incarcerating lots of people, mm-hmm. And we know it's not working because of the recidivism rate. Mm-hmm. But you're also saying that crime rates are dropping. Why doesn't that reflect a positive benefit of the war on drugs? Maybe that is maybe it's working. Maybe we're changing behavior through incarceration. What's your argument against that?
The barriers that people face when they come out of prison or jail are huge. We have helped people through the court system. For the biggest thing that I see, one of the biggest things here in Washington State, and we've done research, there's only 3 states in the union that actually have something that really works for people exiting prison for their identification. Washington State releases anyone from DOC with an offender badge. The badge is what they wear while they're in prison. And the only difference is they make a brand new one just days before they leave. They sign it, and it still has the word offender on it, and it has their DOC number on it. I can show you one. I
have no doubt.
And this is what they're released with, along with a $40 check. And most banks won't cash it because they're a bad dude.
Right.
It doesn't matter that they've served their time and paid their debt. So this is one of the biggest issues that I see for our people. And we actually have gone to Olympia and worked with Senator Carroll. He's passed away in the last year or so. But he had been trying for 30 years to change this.
You're listening to South Fork Law. Our special guest today is Irene Morgan of the Restorative Community Coalition. Why would the state not simply give a release offender a state ID?
Well, that was our question.
Issued by the Department of Licensing.
That was our question. And we went down 2 different times, and we spoke. The DOC didn't even show up the first time. And the second time we went down, there were 2 people from DOC, and one of the women, when we were finished, she was so exasperated with me. She says, Irene, all they have to do, speaking of the offender being released, is go to the DOL, Department of Licensing, when they get home, and get their ID. It's called an identicard, not a driver's license, but an identicard. Right. And I said, but they don't always know where the DMV is. It's moved 3 times in just a little while that I know of here in Whatcom County. And now it costs $45. They only released with a $40 check. Right. So
don't they need some sort of source documents like a birth certificate or something like that?
And the other piece was if the counselor in the prison has done their job, which I'm told they don't always do, there is supposed to be an e-letter that is sent to the Department of Licensing that matches their offender badge. And if that happens, then all they have to do is come with $45 and they have their identicard. You know, if you are homeless, which many of them are, how do you get across town to DMV, or the Department of Licensing, to get your license or to get your card? Well,
that seems like a very simple problem that it should be easily solved, right?
Well, it is. We got so far that the 2 techs, the IT techs, from Department of Corrections and Department of Licensing, got together and said at that time, this has been 3 years ago, I believe, it would take a one-time $34,000 software program. Someone would have to write a software program. It would take 6 months. And it still hasn't been done. Right. So
that's one of the simple problems.
And I figured with 1% being successful, it would save the state every year $2.8 million.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about money. Your website says that 70% of Whatcom County's budget is devoted to law and justice, and that the way you parse this out is that we're spending about $1 million a week on law and justice issues.
That was a few years ago. Pete Kremen gave us those statistics. And
he was the county executive.
He was the county executive then, and we can't even decipher what goes into that. Pete gave us those figures, and now when we ask for those figures, well, they can't tell us because they're scattered throughout the budget. So I don't know what the percentage is now, but at that time it was 51 point some million dollars a year, which averages out to right at $1 million a week spent in law and justice.
So what do you think we locally could do better?
Well, there's many things we could do better. There's restorative justice. One of our people brought restorative justice book to me because he...
What is that?
Restorative justice. Thank you. It's all over the country. One of the main cities, if you want to check it out, go to Longmont, Colorado, and they have been doing it for at least 15 years.
But what is it?
It's a healing process between the perpetrator and the victim. The perpetrator and the victim and anyone else involved in whatever happened comes together, and there's a person that runs the meeting, and they're called circles, and the people, everyone gets to tell their story. And usually the perpetrator doesn't understand how his actions have affected or hurt the victim.
A lack of empathy.
Well, yeah, a lack of knowing, yeah. Empathy because they just don't know. And that's what our court system doesn't do. The victim is hardly ever brought in to the degree that they're addressed and allowed to speak with restorative justice. And and I've been told that it doesn't work with anything other than misdemeanors. However, when you go to some of these websites that we have available on our website and watch some of these videos, it works with virtually everything. And I'm not suggesting that we start with a murder case or something like that. But restorative justice is working, and I went...
So besides telling stories and building empathy, what else happens in the process?
The whole meaning of the process and goal of the process is for the perpetrator to take responsibility. This is not a get out of jail card free. They take responsibility for their actions. They're accountable for whatever it is that the contract, there's a contract written between the parties. And then the perpetrator is to make restitution or do community service or whatever the contract states. And if they don't, then they go through the legal process. Then they go to court. Then they go through the usual process. But the success rates and the completion rate of restorative justice is incredibly high. And the main reason is because the criminal, the perpetrator, does not understand how their actions have affected the victims. And that, I think, it's a healing process that happens.
We have a model of that type of process in juvenile diversion. Restorative justice is used quite a bit in juvenile matters.
Is it still the CAB group, the Community Accountability Board?
Right, exactly.
I served on it 25 years ago.
Right, that's right. That's a board that's provided for by a Washington statute, but it's only for juveniles.
It is, and it's what first and second time offenders, and the success rate there was, I believe, 87% or something. It was an amazing, wonderful success rate.
You're listening to South Fork Law. Our special guest today is Irene Morgan, a founder of the Restorative Community Coalition. Irene, could you tell us a little bit about how the coalition works to reintegrate people who have gotten out of prison back into the community? What's the mechanism? What does it look like?
We are a volunteer organization. There are 20 of us, 25 of us, and we've worked with very, very little funds. And what we do is someone will come to us. Well, number one, I get letters from prisoners while they're still inside, and being the secretary, I answer their questions. They ask for anything in housing. I always send them the housing list. I always send them the voucher. DOC has a voucher system, so I send them that paperwork. I send them... we also have a law that says you have to go back to your county of first offense, so I send them that information in case they want to change their county. So I'm in touch with many of these folks before they come back, and I always encourage them to get in touch with us when they come back. And so some of them do, not all. And when they do, because we don't have a physical office, we're just working out of our homes, and we've had temporary office space, but not anything permanent. And so we work with these folks. We go to court with them. You know what I have realized because people have told me, when I write someone and let them know that I wish them well when they get out, and encourage them to take classes and do what they can to better themselves while they're inside, someone cares. Someone gives a rip. Someone gives them hope. And that is the one thing that I've heard more than any other from the folks that I write is, you gave me hope.
So you're making a human connection.
Absolutely.
But let's talk about the practical things. You said that you provide a housing voucher. You provide information about how to meet their legal requirements. What else on a practical nature are you doing to help reintegrate individuals into the community?
Well, we have bus passes when WTA allows us to have them, and I love the system. It's awesome. So we help them with transportation. I personally pick people up and take them to clear across town. One guy came out, I wrote him, and I met him downtown. He was at Salvation Army. He had to go back and forth across town 3 different times. He had to go to DOC, out to DSHS, and I don't even remember. We spent 3 hours. He would not have been able to get back and forth across town at all with bus passes.
So that's a very practical way in which you helped that individual. And also, are you helping connect folks with educational opportunities and things of that nature?
We have quite a bit of that already. Goodwill has people with conviction histories class, and they help them with interviews, resumes, interviewing, all sorts of things, so they can get back into the workplace.
And so you help connect the offender with those programs?
We help, yes, we connect with anything that's available out there. And those programs are awesome and they work. However, it's been our experience that when people, like I was saying with Delancey Street, when you have a program and everything is all together and cohesive and people have a regular schedule, then they're totally and completely and continually supported. Whereas when they live in separate housing and then they have to get on a bus and go to work or go to school, then there's all this other possibilities, logistics and possibilities, where they can get off track. Whereas if they're totally, and I'm not considering imprisoning them once more,
right.
But it's in a different way. It's a positive way. It's to help them become and learn what they'd never learned before. And one of my favorite things to say now is when people know better, they do better. If you don't know it, you don't know it, and there's no way to know it until you become aware that there's something else you need to be able to be successful in life. And so that's who we are. I changed my life. I developed a self-empowerment program that I now teach. And until I became aware that my anger was something I wasn't born with, that I copied it it was copied learned behavior from my father. I loved my dad, but he had this explosive temper. Well, so did I. But now I'd still get angry. I'm not saying I don't get angry, but now I can channel that anger so that it's productive. And that's actually what this whole process is.
Well, let's say our listeners are hearing about your program and they think they'd like to be involved or they'd like to help support you. What opportunities are there for the community to assist the Restorative Community Coalition?
We need volunteers. We would love to have people as members.
And not every volunteer has to work directly with offenders.
Oh,
not
gosh,
everyone would feel comfortable with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What other opportunities are there for volunteers?
We need to have more fundraisers. We need office space. Of course, we can always use the funds, money. And
if somebody wanted to give you a donation, how would they do that? How would they go about it?
You can, if you don't know our website, or if you don't have a computer, again, I gave you the website.
Go ahead and say them
Say
again.
that one more time.
WhatcomRec.org. That's Whatcom, WhatcomRec.org, and RestorativeCommunityCoalition.org. And our P.O. Box is P.O. Box 31026, Bellingham 98228. And
so there's all different ways for people to volunteer or to contribute money and to help support the work of the Restorative Community Coalition. And not everyone has to work with offenders. Some can just provide support or maybe even some of the secretarial help that you were
that would be
talking
awesome.
about. What other benefits could we expect as a community if we were to rely more on a restorative justice program rather than traditional incarceration? Besides economic, what else could we see?
Well, there'd be more harmony. There's just I'm really encouraged by what I see on TV from our youngsters. The youngsters, they just exude love, and you give them the opportunity, and that's what I see is when we can get along better, and when people understand that their actions really do matter, that you would see less crime. There wouldn't be the number of crimes that we have because people are aware of their actions. And I believe that once you understand that, you become aware, then there's a willingness and an opportunity to do things differently, where you want to be more helpful and less chaotic. And
So we'd be a safer community.
absolutely.
Well, I'm sure that many of our listeners will want to have the opportunity to talk with you further about these ideas and to learn more by looking at your websites, but I'm afraid that we've run out of time. So
This has been South Fork Law. Our special guest today has been Irene Morgan of the Restorative Community Coalition. Thanks very much, Irene, for coming here today and telling us about your organization. We invite you to look at us on our Facebook page. You can find links to this and other shows. We thank our engineer, Robert, and hope you all find some justice out there.